From inside the burning cabin, a girl's cry for help suddenly rang out. Hearing the cry, David dropped the bag in his hand and ran toward it. Although thick smoke had already filled the cabin, he pushed the door open without hesitation and rushed inside. He saw a girl tied to a chair in the room, so he charged into the fire, untied her ropes, and told her to hold her breath so she would not breathe in more smoke. Seeing the flames about to swallow the place whole, he used the last of his strength to get the girl out. But not long after they escaped the cabin, both of them collapsed to the ground and slowly lost consciousness. When David woke up again, the girl was staring straight at him and asking if he was awake. David suddenly thought of his bag. The girl wanted to know what was inside it, but he stammered and said it was nothing. The girl told him he was very brave. Hearing that praise, David smiled. It was the first time in a very long time that he had learned how to smile. Just then, the girl's mother walked over. She gently kissed David on the forehead, thanked him for saving her daughter, and promised she would repay him with anything she had. The girl's parents wanted to help contact David's family, only to find that no one nearby had ever heard of him, and David refused to reveal anything about his family. The boy's identity became even more mysterious. The couple also began to grow extremely cautious. Again and again, they asked him whether he was lying. The man's familiar gestures and the way he kept moving closer could not help but remind David of those terrifying memories from the past. Just a few days earlier, David had still been in a labor camp more than 1,000 kilometers away in Bulgaria. He had lived there since he was little, repeating exhausting forced labor every single day. Almost nothing good had ever happened to him. It filled his young face with the weight of age, made him forget how to smile, and even once made him want to end his own life. But whenever David faced all kinds of hardships, a professor named Johannes would stay by his side. Johannes told David that only by staying alive could he change his fate. Because of that, David began to think about escaping this place. That night, with a grave expression, he quietly listened to a man speaking. The man told him that tonight was his only chance to escape. He had to follow the instructions, get out of the camp, and deliver a wax-sealed letter to Denmark. The journey was destined to be difficult, but he had to remember two things. First, the world outside the camp was certainly much wider, but it also hid many dangers, so he must not trust anyone if he wanted to stay safe. Second, the letter must never be opened early, or his life could be in danger at any moment. David silently took every word to heart. When he woke again in a haze, Johannes, sleeping across from him, seemed to be nodding at him. He knew the time had come. Following the voice inside his heart, and carrying that extremely important letter, he began to carry out his escape plan. Using a truck as cover, he successfully slipped past the heavily guarded patrols and reached the fence covered in electric wire. When he saw the asterisk in the darkness, it meant the power to the fence would be cut for 30 seconds. During that time, he had to climb over the electric fence as fast as he could. David gathered his courage and climbed upward, ignoring the pain of the barbs digging into his skin. The moment his foot touched the ground on the other side, sparks flashed across the fence again, but before he had run more than a few steps, soldiers began shouting behind him. He could only pray silently in his heart. Only when he looked back did he realize the soldiers were merely arguing with each other, and had not spotted the small boy in the night. He quickly rushed into the nearby woods and, according to the plan, dug up a package hidden beneath a tree. Inside were a piece of bread, a small knife, a compass, and a bar of soap with a sad story hidden behind it. After packing up the supplies, David used the compass to find the right direction. In the cold, empty night, there was only the lonely figure of a boy running. He had to make it out of Bulgaria tonight, but one piece of bread was not enough to support him through a night-long sprint. After spotting a line of vehicles, David did not let this chance to hitch a ride slip away. Once he got on, he hid deep inside the cargo area. Before long, already exhausted, he fell into a heavy sleep. When he opened his eyes again, it was already daylight, and the truck was about to leave the border. Just then, a group of soldiers suddenly came to inspect the vehicles. Looking at the uniformed soldiers in front of him, David instantly became nervous. So while they were not paying attention, he jumped out of the truck early and luckily escaped disaster. But with the situation changing by the second, he had no time to rest and could only keep running. By nightfall, he finally reached the border, but this time, he was not so lucky. The high fence and the non-stop electric wire became obstacles on his road to freedom. Driven by a fierce will to survive, he quickly dug a path of hope beneath the fence. But in the end, he was still discovered by patrolling soldiers. At the very last moment before the soldiers reached him, he successfully crossed the border. But when he looked back, he realized the letter had fallen into the hole. In that life-or-death instant, he turned back and grabbed the letter. Now, only a thin sheet of wire separated him from the soldiers. Fortunately, they did not dare fire into another country's territory. As a signal flare flashed faintly in the distance, David finally reached his first stop, Greece. Next, he had to find a way to cross the sea to Italy. He came to a nearby port and, while no one was watching, climbed up a thick rope onto a ship heading for Italy. Then he quickly hid inside a cargo hold that was perfect for staying out of sight. His nerves were so tense that he could not fall asleep. The mysterious letter in his hand was his only hope. When he finally drifted into sleep, a mysterious woman appeared in his dream, smiling at him. Perhaps she was the mother from his memories. But every time he opened his eyes, only Johannes appeared before him, staying with him through one hardship after another. David cried and told Johannes that he could not do it, that he would definitely be found. But Johannes simply smiled and replied that as long as he was good at hiding among the crowd, he could do it. There were places in the world filled with kindness, and he would meet them one day. Now, this was a journey that belonged to him alone, and its destination was kindness and freedom. But in the end, Johannes was only a dream of David's. The next morning, he was woken by a sailor who would not stop talking. Luckily, he had been exposed to many languages in the labor camp, so he easily understood what the sailor was saying. The sailor said the ship could not hide a stowaway, then turned around, ready to report him to his superior. In desperation, David took out the small knife he carried. The beautiful Soviet-made knife pleased the sailor very much. Although the sailor failed to trick David out of his compass, he still agreed to help David hide. The condition was that before the ship entered port, David had to get off. After sailing for some time, the ship arrived near the harbor. The sailor put a life jacket on David, then lowered him by rope onto the sea. The sailor told him the tide would carry him to shore on its own. Although David said he was not afraid, he had never seen the sea before, and the moment he touched the water, he was still incredibly nervous. Fortunately, the faith Johannes had given him held him up and helped him keep going. When he woke on the shore the next day, the scenery here was completely different from the labor camp in his memory. The open hillside and the jewel blue sea seemed to be celebrating David's rebirth. The exhaustion from days of travel vanished in the beauty around him. At last, he could bathe in the sunlight, breathe in the air of freedom, and wash away the dust left by the labor camp and the market. Suddenly, a plane roared overhead. David nervously tried to hide. He realized that his mission was far from over. Next, he still had to travel north. After some time, he arrived in an unfamiliar town. Although there were no uniformed soldiers here, the looks from the people around him made him deeply uncomfortable. Those words began repeating in his ears. The outside world is full of danger, and you must not trust anyone. So he could only travel carefully while trying to find something to eat. When he passed a bakery, the owner warmly invited him inside. When the owner learned that he had no money for bread, he said it did not matter, as long as David was willing to help in the shop in exchange for food. The owner's only requirement was that he greet customers with a smile. But David, who had grown up in a labor camp, seemed to have no memory of ever smiling. He had no idea how to smile at all. Seeing his blank expression, the owner turned to St. Elizabeth in the bakery and complained that there was actually someone in the world who did not know how to smile. After that, the owner gave David a card of St. Elizabeth, hoping she would protect him. Once everything was explained, the owner said he was going to get some fresh bread, but the moment he turned around, he began talking with a police officer at the door. The alert David immediately understood everything. He knew what uniforms meant. When the owner brought the police officer into the shop, David seized the right moment and quickly ran out. After escaping the bakery, he ignored the hunger in his stomach and began running desperately without stopping. Those painful memories were like an invisible shackle, locked deep in his heart, as if they would never go away. After a while, completely exhausted, he ran into a desolate patch of woods, stumbled, and fell to the ground. Then he began rolling over and over until he slammed into a tree and finally stopped. But because of that, the compass was completely broken. This made the rest of the journey even harder. Without a direction, David had no idea where to go and could only wander through the woods like a headless fly. Seeing himself trapped there, David once again remembered those unbearable days from the past. The officer gathered everyone in the labor camp together just to find a missing bar of soap. But what happened afterward was blurry in his memory. All he remembered was that on that day, he heard the sound of a bullet being loaded. Struck by the memory, David returned to reality. He silently prayed to St. Elizabeth and looked toward the distant sky. Unexpectedly, St. Elizabeth seemed to truly answer him. David suddenly felt as if he had received some kind of guidance. slowly climbed to the top of a tall tree, and from there saw the direction of the exit. After that, he once again set out on his lonely journey. When he reached a small town, a dog blocked his path. Perhaps even the little dog could not stand David's gloom, because it barked while chasing after him. Only after he was forced to climb onto a high wall did an old woman who owned the dog appear just in time. She not only helped David chase the dog away, but also handed him a basket of wine without giving him a chance to refuse, telling him to deliver it to the farm up ahead. As she spoke, she also stuffed 2 coins into his hand as payment for the errand. Hearing that he could earn money, David jogged all the way and soon completed the task. Looking at the lively party on the farm, he could hardly imagine whether such a beautiful life could really exist, but the farmer did not welcome him. David could only leave in disappointment. On the road, he picked up a broken piece of mirror from the ground. He only wanted to see whether he really looked so miserable and unlikable. When he saw a shop not far ahead, he began practicing his smile in the mirror, hoping people might like him, but because he had never smiled before, his smile looked a little unnatural. Originally, he planned to keep smiling and buy something to fill his stomach, but the shopkeeper thought he was urgently looking for a bathroom. David, whose stomach was growling with hunger, could not care about that and directly stated what he wanted. He wanted this, that, and those over there, all packed up for him. The owner thought a big sale had walked in, only to discover that David had only 2 small coins on him. Feeling like he had been made a fool of, the owner instantly flew into a rage. David could only leave, lonely and disappointed. The yellow and white book in the shop window seemed to witness every time he refused to give up. The happy mother and child on the street always made him think of his own mother. If he had a family too, maybe he would not be starving on the street. All this time, whether in wind or rain, he had always endured everything alone. Those painful memories also grew clearer as the rain washed over him, until the moment she disappeared. His mother was still calling his name. Johannes was right. Only by staying alive could things change. He had to deliver the letter on him to Denmark before he could uncover the mystery of his own identity. After that, he had no choice but to keep moving down the road. Not long after leaving the town, he came across a couple who were arguing. Their car had run out of gas and could only stop by the roadside, but neither of them was willing to run to the nearby gas station for fuel. Kind-hearted David once again became an errand boy. He carried the gas can to the station, then successfully returned with the help of the attendant on a little motorbike. On the road, David spread his arms behind the attendant like a young eagle ready to soar. At that moment, something inside him began to waver. Perhaps the outside world still had plenty of trust and beauty waiting for him. After successfully handing the gas can to the couple, David also received a decent reward. This time, he could not only eat a full meal, but also buy a big bag full of food. After eating his fill, David set off again. After passing through a sun-dappled forest path, the exhausted boy lay down on the ground and fell asleep. Before long, he was woken by a cute little gray rabbit. Guided by the little gray rabbit, he once again confirmed the direction he needed to go. After traveling for a while longer, he came to a sea of sunflowers. Even beneath scattered clouds, the golden ocean was still breathtakingly beautiful. Such a beautiful sight slowly cleared away some of the shadow on David's face. After passing through another dense forest, he saw an angel-like girl playing in the sunlight with 2 boys. They had a kind of happiness he could not understand. Their home was a luxurious manor. David had only climbed onto the wall for one look when someone dragged him down and beat him. After struggling free from the boy, he hurriedly fled in panic. Only when David reached the water did he realize blood was coming from his nose. He hated this blood that symbolized hatred and harm, so he desperately tried to wipe the blood away. But even with that precious bar of soap, he could not wash clean the dark red stain inside his heart. Furious and broken, he threw the soap straight into the water. Whenever he ran into trouble, he would ask Johannes for help. If staying alive was the only way to change things, why did they not use this borrowed life to try to escape? Every time, Johannes would say that he was afraid. Neither of them wanted to live in fear anymore. Now David could not understand why. Even though he had already escaped, fear still rose inside him from time to time. Before he could figure it out, an urgent cry for help came from the burning cabin behind him. David threw himself into the flames and rescued the trapped girl inside. Because the girl was Maria, the daughter of the castle owner, he was brought into this beautiful castle. Maria expressed her sincere gratitude to him. No matter who someone is, risking their life to save another person is the highest form of trust. Maria's angelic smile finally helped David understand what a smile meant. Because of that, he let go of all his defenses and worries, and began to embrace this beautiful world. The boy who beat him yesterday was not really a bad person either. He had simply mistaken the sneaky-looking David for a thief. After learning that David had saved his sister, the boy offered him his sincerest apology. It was exactly as Johannes had said. The malice in this world often comes from difference. David's strange behavior could invite misunderstanding, but Maria's outstretched right hand was enough to break through every worry. That indescribable trust and warmth was exactly what David, raised in violence and isolation, longed for most. And it was precisely this that slowly made him understand that he had to learn to fit into such a world. But at this moment, he still could not quite believe that such beauty truly existed in the world. He told Maria that he had once seen many terrifying people and things. This made Maria feel that he seemed to know nothing about the beautiful things in the world, perhaps wanting him to see a more complete world. Maria brought him to her father's study. The room full of books and paintings instantly captured David's attention. What interested him most was still the globe in the room. He wanted to know where Denmark was. Unexpectedly, to travel north from here, he would still have to pass through Switzerland and Germany. Just then, Maria's parents came in. They very much wanted to know where brave David's home was, but the male host, used to asking questions with gestures, frightened David badly. David also knew they meant no harm. He just did not know how many baths it would take to wash away those painful memories from the labor camp. Looking at the soap in front of him, David finally remembered what had caused that tragedy. He had secretly taken a bar of soap from the officer's office. He only wanted the people in the camp to be able to take a clean bath, never expecting it would trigger a storm of blood. For stealing in the labor camp, the officer intended to make an example of someone. David gripped the soap tightly and trembled non-stop. When Johannes discovered it, he immediately snatched the soap out of David's hand. The officer nearby saw everything, but the officer had no other choice and could only shoot Johannes. The violent sound of the gunshot pulled David back to reality. He understood that he had to reach Denmark as soon as possible, because what he carried was not just a mission, but also the hope of Johannes and everyone in the camp. He changed back into his worn-out clothes and placed the St. Elizabeth card beside Maria's pillow. He hoped St. Elizabeth would protect this kind and beautiful girl. He felt that he did not deserve to have such beautiful things. And so, David once again set out on the road to Denmark, traveling north. He arrived in a city that seemed prosperous at first glance. Unexpectedly, the class conflict here was even sharper. Watching a group of protesters moving through the street, David did not understand the meaning of what they were doing, yet innocent as he was, he still got swept into the conflict. A soldier thought he was one of the rebels and grabbed him, locking him inside a vehicle. Helpless, he wanted to take out the letter to comfort himself, only to find that the wax seal on the envelope had already been opened. He thought the mission had failed, but what he never expected was that inside the envelope was proof of his own identity. It recorded his detailed information. This allowed the boy, lost for so many years, to finally find his real self, and it reignited his determination to complete the mission. While the soldier was fighting with other people, David quickly used the bandage on his hand to pull open the door handle. By the time the soldier came forward to grab him back, David had already escaped from beneath the vehicle to the other side. At this moment, he was finally not going to Denmark just to deliver a letter, but to pursue his own freedom. Even though he was already exhausted from running, he still forced out a relieved smile. Just then, the urgent sound of a horn suddenly came from behind him. When he turned around, it was the very sailor who had once let him go. Perhaps his luck had finally turned, because David successfully caught a free ride and made it safely to Milan. After saying goodbye to the sailor, David continued toward his destination. After another long journey, he arrived beside a picturesque lake. There, he met an old woman who was painting. An artist's eyes are always very sharp. With just one glance, Sophie read the sadness on David's face that did not belong to a child his age. It could not help but stir her creative passion, and so, David became her model. Sophie looked at David in front of her, who not only sat completely still, but was also painfully silent, saying nothing at all. So Sophie kindly reminded him that he was allowed to talk while she painted, and that he should trust her skill. But David only said that he did not know what to say. Sophie was helpless about this, but she still respected David's choice. At the same time, she very much wanted to invite David to her home for lunch. Unfortunately, her home was far away across the border in Switzerland. When David heard that, he thought this was perfect. The next stop on the way to Denmark was Switzerland, so he got into Sophie's car. On the road, Sophie asked whether his parents would worry about him traveling alone. Seeing that David did not want to answer, she did not keep asking. Soon, the two of them arrived at the border checkpoint. Seeing uniformed guards checking documents, David instantly became nervous and said he had no papers and wanted to get out. Sophie saw David's embarrassment and comforted him. saying the checks here were not strict. When the guard came to inspect David's documents, Sophie claimed David was her grandson and had only forgotten his papers because they left in a hurry. David played along and forced out a stiff smile. Facing the guard's insistence, Sophie joked with him and said to make an exception, because the boy was only here to overthrow the government and would leave very soon. The guard could not help laughing after hearing this and said that once David took power, he should remember to raise their wages. A warm joke easily defused a crisis. After that, David followed Sophie to her home. Looking at the paintings inside the house, David felt as if his soul had been washed clean. Sophie hung her new painting of David on the wall. Looking at his own dim, lifeless eyes in the painting, David could not help wondering whether this was how others saw him. Sophie only told him softly that a painting must be appreciated from different angles. For example, when she looked at David's portrait, her first impression was of a kind but serious child, especially those deep eyes, which seemed to hold endless sadness. That was all she could see, because David had hidden his true self too deeply. In truth, David was just like any ordinary child. If he had never gone through all that pain, perhaps he too would have longed for the unknown and beautiful things in life. Sophie prepared a table full of food and generously showed him the pendant on her chest. The photo inside the pendant was of her son. Once, a plague swept across all of Europe and took away her young son. From then on, only this cat stayed by her side at all times. David had never seen a real cat before. He could not help marveling at how soft its body was, and at that magical purring sound. Then he buried his entire head in the cat's fur, trying to feel the wonder and cuteness of the world. Looking at the kind boy before her, Sophie could not help thinking of her own son. She wanted to know about David's family. David put down the cat in his arms, looked at his portrait on the wall, and accidentally said that he had no home. Then he quickly corrected himself, saying his home was with a circus. Sophie did not keep pressing him, but gently said that if he had nowhere to go, he could stay here tonight. But at this moment, David did not dare stop for even a second. Sophie, however, said that she truly hoped she could help him. Hearing this, David only begged Sophie not to send him back. After hearing those words, Sophie was not surprised. Instead, with eyes full of deep kindness, she told David that he did not have to reveal any secret. She promised David that he was safe here, and no one would be able to take him away. Wrapped in Sophie's warm and gentle heart, David finally realized that he had truly escaped that dangerous place. At last, he took off his hard outer shell, threw himself into Sophie's arms, and cried out loud. Since escaping the camp, she was the only person who had helped him without asking why. That night, David slept especially peacefully. He no longer had nightmares, but dreamed that his mother was kissing him. The next morning, David went out with Sophie. The scenery here was incredibly beautiful, and a pleasant breeze drifted through the air. Seeing all this, David could not help wondering why people created cruel wars, and why there were bad people everywhere in the world, because his friend had once told him that he must not trust anyone. After hearing this, Sophie seemed to understand something. She understood why, when they first met, David always looked so cold and guarded. Once again, she tried to help David walk out of the shadow inside his heart. If you trust no one, life becomes meaningless. Most people in this world are still kind, and they all have their own families and friends. Even if bad people exist, we cannot give up the courage to appreciate others, and we must not let ourselves become cut off from the world because of them. Because if we do, our own lives will fall into a complete mess. Perhaps wanting David to experience the beauty of the world for himself, Sophie let him wander around nearby on his own and meet her later at the library. David was finally no longer walking just to survive the road. Once again, he saw the book with the yellow and white cover, but before he could go up and ask for the title, the person holding the book had already gotten into a car and left. Music drifted out of a church, drawing in David, who longed for a blessing. He pushed open the church door and slowly walked forward, but to his shock, an officer followed his steps inside and stopped beside him. Looking at the gun at the man's waist, David felt as if he was about to fall back into those painful memories. But when he remembered Sophie's words, he gathered his courage, lifted his head, and greeted the officer. Unexpectedly, a smile instantly appeared on the man's once serious face. He also gave David his blessing. At that moment, the memory about the soap finally became complete. The officer in the camp had seen that David was the one who took the soap, but soon he exchanged a look with Johannes. In the end, to protect David, the officer had no choice but to point his gun at Johannes. Afterward, the officer was going to be transferred away from the camp. Thinking that he would no longer be able to secretly look after David, he made a detailed escape plan for him and personally handed him the envelope containing David's information, but in panic and guilt, David had blurred out that painful memory. Amid the prayers and hymns in the church, David finally lowered all his defenses. The world certainly held ugliness, but at the same time, it also held even more beauty. Only by being willing to let go of the past could he accept a better version of himself. David arrived at the town library as promised. There, he once again saw the book with the yellow and white cover. Through Sophie's introduction, he finally learned that the book was called Journey in Sorrow. The author was a Bulgarian woman. In the book, she told the story of what she experienced after the war. Her husband and son had both been killed, and the guard responsible for arresting her at the time was actually the childhood friend she had grown up with. In the end, with the guard's help, she was able to escape, disguise her identity, and go to Denmark to become a writer. When David saw the author's photo on the back of the book, the memories sleeping deep in his mind suddenly woke up. This was the mother he had longed for day and night, the mother who appeared in his dreams. David could hardly believe everything in front of him. He finally understood that the officer who protected him was exactly the guard his mother had mentioned. The officer had sent him north with his identity information so he could return to his mother's side. After learning the truth, Sophie immediately took David to the police station. With the help of the local authorities, David finally brought this long journey to an end. After saying goodbye to Sophie at the airport, David boarded a plane to Denmark. At last, he was no longer afraid of the strangers around him. On the plane, David seemed to see Johannes in his final moment, smiling and nodding, passing him the hope to live well. David finally set foot on Danish soil, watching his mother in a red dress walk toward him step by step. David could no longer hold back the longing in his heart. After all those years apart, mother and son finally held each other tightly in their arms.